Okay, Mark. Well, I had you complete two different assessments for me before today's intake, largely based on your referral and the conversation on the phone. It became pretty clear, at least, to dig a little bit deeper to clarify your levels of depression. And, we don't use any one scale diagnostically by itself. That's based on the overall intake of information. But especially the depression inventory can be very helpful to kind of get a feel for it. So before I go over the scores of both of these and explain what it means and maybe highlight a few questions, just generally speaking, how would you describe your experience? Because, some of these questions can kind of tap into some deep thoughts and feelings.
Some of them were definitely tougher than others.
Okay.
And, some of them kind of made me think about some things, kind of like the crying. Like, that was something that, until, really kind of putting it on paper was kind of almost kind of shocking to me in some ways.
Right. And so you did a good job. You completed all the questions. Yep. So what I want to do then, based on your comments just there, is kind of first talk about the depression inventory that you filled out. Your overall score, sometimes scores initially don't want to interpret them too much. You scored a 27.
Okay.
So that would be considered moderately depressed. I know that sounds still subjective. It's not severe, like wicked up there. Yeah. And, to be honest, it seems to match what we've discussed, meaning that although you're clearly feeling down, you're feeling sad, you're still able to go to work.
Yeah.
You don't get every task done, but you get some done. Yeah. The relationship is affected, but it's still there. Yeah. So it's somewhere in the middle, all right? So this moderate score helps me too. One of the things, especially we're going to do with the depression inventory, is every 1 or 2 sessions is I'm going to have you complete these again. And what we're going to largely do this is to track. Assessment isn't just a one-shot deal. It's something that we'll do multiple times. And hopefully what we'll see, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be always a line down, but we can kind of track. Sometimes I even graph them out over time to see how they change. So this gives us what I like to call a baseline starting point, and we'll just kind of take it from there. And so you already explained a little bit of your reaction to a couple questions. I went through as well when I was scoring it and just highlighted a few of them. And it was based upon, you took this before we spoke, but after the intake, kind of looking at this, it kind of makes sense. So you wrote down self-dislike and self-criticism. You chose, I am disappointed in myself, and I criticize myself for all of my faults. What's just your initial reaction to that?
Yeah, well, I think those were kind of some of the tougher questions for me to answer, and especially, with everything that's been going on at work, we've been having a lot of turnover lately, and I've been having to look for a lot of new people to hire, and when I fail at that, it really, really hits me hard, and I think that putting it on paper made me realize how kind of upset I am with myself when I kind of don't do something successfully. And it's upsetting to me, and I kind of blame myself that I'm really not kind of worthy of the job, and I'm not doing a good enough job, and I'm not helping the company, and I'm just kind of holding people back.
It's funny you say that. When I was scoring this, when I read this, I immediately thought of your job, your work, really being critical of yourself for your faults. So I think that this is helpful for us too, not just the overall score, but even for our treatment goal and interventions, is I think you'll probably agree that working on kind of your self-worth into some ways of your job, and I'm sure this may translate in your relationships, of, you seem pretty hard on yourself. And that, of course, results in also not liking yourself. And the way this is worded, disappointed in myself, I can see why you would think that way. This was a big one that we discussed as well. Loss of interest. I've lost most of my interest. That pretty much matches what we've talked in the intake, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
And you didn't say 3, it's hard to get interested in anything, which is accurate, because you still are able to do a few things. Maybe you're not taking the dog out to the park, but you're still walking around the yard. Maybe you're not doing as much as with your wife as you'd want to, but you still mention the cooking, right? And you don't do every task at home, but you still do some things and get things done. But it's still something to monitor. This is definitely something that we're going to work on pretty soon with the activity scheduling and monitoring. And then this is also one, too, just to let you know that I'm going to keep an eye on, is your feelings of worthlessness. You checked off here, I feel more worthless as compared to other people. Could you explain just a little bit what you're thinking when you...
I think that's one that kind of, at least compared to other people, I feel like that comes up a lot at work. Where, I'm not doing as much for the company as other people.
So self-comparison to your colleagues, for example?
And sometimes I feel kind of worthless with Melissa, where sometimes I feel like I'm kind of dragging her down, and I kind of feel like I'm worthless, that I'm not really giving her what she needs, and that I'm not adding much, but it's not really compared to other people thing there.
Right. No, I can see the work, how maybe there's some comparison, but your relationship, it's more in the sense of how you're affecting it and the way you perceive it, like a negatively affecting that relationship. Okay, that helps me understand, because that's kind of a broad statement, so the details really help me understand that a little bit more. Okay, so if you're okay, I'm going to move on to the hopelessness scale. Now, this one here, although obviously I explained it to you before you filled it out, it's not as clear as what it's looking at, right? The questions were kind of different.
Yeah, a lot different.
Yeah. So one thing I'll tell you with the hopelessness scale is, first, obviously, you mentioned to me at the beginning that for the first time with your depressive episodes, you've been feeling kind of hopeless. So of course, I'm thinking some depression, hopelessness, it makes sense to give a hopelessness scale as well. The other part too is I always like to just be sure, because your level of depression, and although you said you're not suicidal, I know it's a strong word, it's this actually that this skill can help kind of tap into that a little bit. And so this here you scored a 12. That's the moderate, but it's kind of the high moderate range. Okay, so what that tells me is that it's something that I, as your therapist, should make sure I continue to monitor this. Okay. One thing, it's one thing to be depressed, it's another thing to be depressed and not have hope for change. And so I know you're saying you're feeling a little bit more hopeful now, but you still have moments of hopelessness. So I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is important to track with you over time. Okay? Now, there's just a couple questions here I wanted to look a little bit into. Is this one here you wrote down true. I might as well give up because there's nothing I can do about making things better for myself. What does that mean?
I mean, it's one of those things where, this has been going on for a while, and like I'm really wondering if I'm going to be able to make the changes necessary. And I just kind of that seed of doubt where, is this going to kind of all be worth it in the end? Is it going to be worth my time? Is it going to be something I'm going to be capable of doing? So there's that doubt. It's just always there.
I think as soon as you said that word, I was thinking the same thing, as you kind of have that self-doubt if things are going to change and get better. And to some degree, I understand where you're coming from, because what's been 10, 12, 13 years since your first depressive episode, and they've been getting progressively longer and more intense. Again, can't promise anything, but I can assure you that we're going to do our best. I mean, you're here, and I hope to see you again, the weeks to come, that we're going to try to work on this a little bit more. I think what's helpful with therapy, especially with that behavior activation, is when you start to, it's one thing for me to say it, you're eventually going to need to experience it for yourself, that change. And so if you're willing to at least give it a shot each week with me, hopefully that can kind of show you that it's possible you can make these changes. Just one more. This one here, let's see if I got it right. I can't imagine what my life would be like in 10 years. You also mark that as true.
Kind of like you just said, this has been going on for so long. 10, 11, 12, 13 years now, and to think what it would be like 10 years from now, it's kind of scary, because the kind of the trend that I've been going on, if that trend were to continue, I honestly don't know where that would bring me, and that's kind of scary to think about, and that's why I'm here today.
Right, and thinking 10 years in advance is hard enough in general,
Yeah.
But especially when you're feeling as depressed as you are, if you're using the trajectory like you're doing, definitely when your lens, the only image maybe you see is going that way. Yeah. And so again, what we're going to try to do is, maybe it won't be a complete spike up, there'll be, but try to change that trajectory going in the other way. And so maybe even at the end of therapy, maybe 10 years is too far down the road, but at the end of therapy, whenever that time comes, if we can even say 6 months or a year or two from now, I personally would judge that as good therapeutic progress. So I wouldn't focus so much on the number. Okay. It was good that you did for this assessment, but for us, we'll take smaller steps and then make those steps bigger. Does that sound good?
That sounds reasonable.
All right. Thanks, Mark.